everybody. Welcome to San Diego 2020 Women on Boards. My name is Betsy Berkemer-Creder, and I'm the CEO of 2020 Women on Boards globally. And I'm delighted to welcome you today and to bring you into the fold of what's happening with 2020 Women on Boards. You're in for a treat today, so glad you carved out the time. It's my pleasure to say thank you to the chairs here, the hard-working chairwomen here in the San Diego campaign, and that I thank Teresa Jack so much, and Jennifer Rubin, and all the members of the leadership committee whom you're going to meet, and the director coaches who make this event possible. 2020 Women on Boards is a 501c3 campaign and the leading education and advocacy organization moving and advancing women forward to corporate boards. And many of you in this audience are going to be among those as you start and complete your journey. Today's theme of our city events, and we have 28 city events throughout the country, and our city events theme is Women Directors During Times of Crisis, because the experience that you have gained throughout these crises with your companies will be a valuable asset that you bring to corporate boards where you serve later on. And I'd like to give you a little sense of size, what's going on with this momentum. You're going to hear shortly from Annalisa Barrett with our statistics about the 2020 Women on Boards, and Annalisa has developed. And with that, I'd like you to know that this is just the beginning. We have a great many supporters among the 28 events throughout the country. There are 6,000 people attending. And last week, I hope most of you saw the global broadcast, there were 3,300 people, men as well as women, on that global broadcast, listening in and hearing Melinda Gates and the Melody Hobson, and of course, Valerie Jarrett, and many other speakers that we had internationally. And so I'm very pleased to welcome San Diego on this important day, and to remind all of you about the law in California, why California is so important, and why you being located in California and in San Diego is a strategic launching point. Because as you might know, SB 826, the law that I and others were able to get passed over a 7-year effort to get this done, this required at least one woman on every California board last year. And then the next deadline is the end of 2021, when at least 3 women are going to be required on every California public company. And this means opportunities for you, because last year in 2019, 200 women were added to California company boards. And by the end of next year, there will be 600 more seats added, 600. And many of those public companies are in San Diego, and certainly in Southern California, but San Diego, with your rich biotech and technology industries, there are opportunities for you that you'll learn today about networking and ferreting out those opportunities for yourself. And then of course, you could also join our 2020 Women on Boards Get On Board workshops in January and February, which we're going to announce shortly. So, you know, when we started out 10 years ago, this is our 10th anniversary of 2020 Women on Boards. We started out 10 years ago, the Russell 3000 had only 10% of all board seats in the Russell 3000, that's 3,000 companies. Only 10% were held by women. And now, as of 2020, our goal has been reached last year, where we got to 20% last year. And we are looking forward to what's going to happen next. So our new campaign that really starts with great speed and energy on January 1st, our new campaign is going to advocate for gender balanced boards. Now, what does that mean? Gender balanced boards means close to parity, close to half. In many cases, when boards have an odd number of board members, you can't cut a woman or a man in half. So it's either one more or one less from half for gender balanced boards. And this is going to bring such great decision making to companies in San Diego and the rest of California. So what is our brand new theme going to be? Drum roll. We're going to have, our vision will be the public companies boards will be, as I mentioned, holding half of the corporate board seats, and our new brand will be 50-50 women on boards. We've been 20-20 women on boards for the last 10 years. Now we're moving forward without a date. We're not setting a date, and we're only setting a target of 50-50 women on boards, 50% men, 50% women. What a huge difference that will bring to corporations and to the businesses and the US and the global economy. Just imagine, we can't even imagine what companies will be like when they have 50% women on boards. Now, it doesn't just get you to be on a board because you're a woman, but you bring certain business acumen that you're going to hear about and be able to capture in your sound bites, starting with your experience today. You're going to hear from your director coaches shortly. And I think that, next slide, please. I just wanted to say that our new programs are going to be coming up. Sorry, 1 second. Our new program starting in January will be for mid-career women. We have many programs for senior career women, but for mid-career women, say in their 40s and 30s and 40s, learning the ropes about visibility and networking in order to prepare for the long term getting on corporate boards. So with that, I would like to introduce my good friend to all of us, Annalisa Barrett. She is the Senior Advisor for Board Leadership for the Board Leadership Center at KPMG here in San Diego, and been very much involved with 20-20 Women on Boards for many years. Annalisa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Betsy. It's such an honor to be here with you today, and we're so grateful for your leadership and all the change that you have made in regard to advancing opportunities for women on boards. And hello to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Betsy mentioned, I'll just spend a few minutes sharing with you some statistics about the progress that's being made regarding gender diversity in the boardroom. And so the first slide that we have here is from research done by 20-20 Women on Boards, focused on Russell 3000 companies. And again, the largest 3,000 companies in the US in general are included in that Russell 3000 index. And you can see that that progress that Betsy was talking about, passing the 20%, and California skyrocketing up during the 2019 year, thanks to SB 826, which Betsy mentioned, the requirement here in California that companies have gender diversity in their boardroom, and other initiatives such as 20-20 Women on Boards, and other focus from institutional investors and other stakeholders. The next slide shows the achievements of the companies that have achieved the previous goal of 20-20 Women on Boards, which is the 20%. So 20% of the people in the boardroom are women at 68% of the companies in California now, and that compares to only 38% that had met that goal only 2 years ago. So again, really great progress being made here in California. And we'll get to specifics on San Diego in the next slide. As Betsy mentioned, we do have the requirement SB 826, and a recent new law was passed regarding expanding the diversity definition, and the next speaker will actually get into the details of those. So we can go ahead and skip to the next slide and talk about the issue regarding going beyond the companies in the Russell 3000. So here in California, it turns out because of our focus on growing new companies, and a lot of IPOs and microcap companies have success here in the California economy, we have a lot of companies that are not large enough to be included in the Russell 3000. So when you expand the definition to all public companies that are traded on the NASDAQ and NYSE, we actually have 650 companies headquartered here in California. And previous to the SB 826 first year of implementation, so in 2018, about almost a third of the companies headquartered in California did not have any women on their boards, and that number has dropped to only 2% now. Next slide, please. Focusing in on the San Diego headquartered companies for today's discussion, you can see that San Diego has also achieved the 20% threshold. That was the goal previously of this organization. And currently 23% of the women that are the people who are serving on public company boards headquartered here in San Diego are women. Next slide, please. When we look at the companies that are headquartered here in San Diego and consider which of them have achieved the 6, we see, however, that although almost all of the companies in San Diego achieved the first goal, which was to have 1 woman on the board by the end of 2019, not quite 20% of the companies headquartered here in San Diego have achieved the second goal, which is to have 1, 2, or 3 women on the board by the end of 2021. So in the next 13 months, there is quite a bit of opportunity for women seeking board service because well over 100 board seats will need to be filled by women in the San Diego area in order for all companies to achieve the mandate. Next slide, please. I wanted to just show this slide to point out a common trend in that board diversity does seem to be more successful, or we see more board diversity among larger companies. And that holds true here in San Diego as well. You can look at the fine print on this slide later. These slides will be available for you. But the big story is that the larger companies, most of them have 2 or even more women on their boards, while the smaller companies are still in that category, most of them of having 1 or maybe 2 women on the board. However, we do have several female founder-led pre-revenue companies that have more than 3 women on their board. So a few shining stars in our midst. Next slide, please. This last slide just shows the percent of companies headquartered in San Diego that have achieved these various thresholds of percent of women in each boardroom. So again, we have, over half of the companies have achieved the 20%. So, 20% of the people on the board are female. However, if we go to the challenge that Betsy just set forth by identifying the new goal of this organization as being gender balanced boards, only 2% of the companies headquartered here in San Diego have achieved that goal. So again, no shortage of opportunity for women seeking board service. And now I'm just thrilled and honored to be able to pass the torch to over to my friend and colleague, Jen Rubin. She is the co-chair of this year's event, and she is going to give you some very valuable insights as to the legal.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. Greetings, I am Jen Rubin. I am an employment lawyer with Mintz, practicing executive compensation. I also advise boards relating to diversity and inclusion issues. I'm also a member of Mintz's newly launched ESG practice group. Today, I'm going to be providing you with what I like to call actual and aspirational mandates for board representation. I'm going to focus on federal and state statutory initiatives aimed at gender and underrepresented communities.
Ramifications and the legal status of the laws here in California.
Greetings, I'm Jen Rubin. I am an employment lawyer with Mintz, practicing executive compensation. I also advise boards of directors relating to diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I'm also a member of the Mintz ESG practice group. Today, I'm going to provide you with some updates on what I like to call the actual and aspirational legal mandates for board representation. My presentation will cover federal and state statutory initiatives aimed at gender and underrepresented communities on corporate boards. I will briefly address some of the existing cases challenging these measures and will leave you with some closing thoughts on how ESG and other recent events might change the way boards are composed in the future. So we start with California. As you've heard, California is the leader of statutory initiatives aimed at board representation. Of course, you've heard about SB 826, which relates to gender equity on boards. Most recently, California passed a new statute, AB 979, which is modeled on SB 826, but requires board seats to be filled by individuals from underrepresented communities. For purposes of AB 979, underrepresented communities include individuals who self-identify as Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American, Hawaiian, or Alaska Natives, or individuals who self-identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. AB 979 goes into effect in just 6 short weeks, and mandates must be reached by the end of 2021. I'm going to be speaking about some of the legal challenges that have been mounted to these California initiatives, but first, while recognizing that California is the great statutory disruptor, let's survey what our sister states are doing with respect to gender representation on boards. So we have here what I like to call California wannabes. These are states that have pondered implementing mandatory board representation, but have yet to bring it to the finish line. Each of these prospective laws are modeled on the California model, except Hawaii's proposal actually amps the penalties from $300,000 to $500,000 for violating their law. I call Massachusetts light because its runway to gender parity is much longer than the California model. But Massachusetts, Hawaii, New Jersey, and Michigan should be commended for seriously thinking about these issues. So we move from mandatory board representation to mandatory reporting about board representation. Illinois, New York, Washington, and Maryland have each passed statutes requiring this reporting. The state of Washington wins what I call the Dealer's Choice Award because companies have 2 options. Number 1 is mandatory board representation for women, but the genders may choose door number 2, which simply requires the reporting of gender composition. New York wins the I couldn't come up with a better title award for its law, which is called the Boards Study Law, which doesn't exactly inspire, but let's hope it propels boards into thinking about these issues. Iowa, which seems to go its own way politically as a career, if a state could have a career, has considered mandatory reporting as well as a proposed certification to recognize boards with equal gender composition. It's unclear how this can be effective as a statutory mandate. It seems more like a recognition to tout rather than something that will propel real change. And then several states, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Colorado, have passed or have considered resolutions that encourage mandatory board representation. But again, encouragement falls short of a statutory mandate. Hawaii and Ohio have passed resolutions that encourage board representation itself, but actually require reporting board representation. Again, we started with the outright requirement, but ended with what I like to think of as a tepid suggestion. But keep in mind, if you haven't noticed, there are several other states who have yet to weigh in, if in fact they ever do. So you may be wondering what's going on at the federal level. Well, a lot, but nothing that's actually come to fruition and actually gone to the president's desk for signature. It will be very interesting to see how the new administration deals with some of these issues. Look for changes at the SEC and how they approach ESG and board composition and things of that nature. So we move from these activities in our federal and state legislatures. Let's talk about some of the activities in our courts. And for that activity, we return to California, where we began. 3 cases have been filed to date challenging SB 826, which is the gender mandate. Milan versus Padilla, some of you may remember from my presentation if you joined us last year, the OSI system shareholder case, where the OSI system shareholder challenged SB 826 because there was a particular female who was nominated for the slate of the directors. By the way, she won by a landslide, a record number of votes by shareholders for that particular board member. That case has been dismissed. The second case, Colebrook versus Padilla, that case was voluntarily dismissed, which leaves 1 case standing. which is Kress versus Padilla. There, the court overruled a demur, which is a dismissal, and the case is scheduled to be tried in June. Now we turn to Kress versus Padilla challenging AB 979. And that was filed 6 days after Governor Newsom signed AB 979. I wonder what took them so long. Moving on. I want to leave you with some thoughts and observations as we move from the legislatures to the courts, because we inevitably end up with the shareholders who, after all, drive the corporate mission. And here it's important to pause and think about how shareholders are holding boards accountable, not just for ESG principles, environmental, social governance. And a shout out to my partner, Scott Stanton, who so eloquently explained ESG as the impact of the corporate mission on the corporate plan, purpose, and people. If you approach these issues in a reactive manner, you may find yourself on the receiving end of shareholder derivative litigation. And here I point out this case that was filed against the board of Monster Beverage. The claims on the right were touted on Monster's website as being the things that the board was very committed to and intended to carry out. But in fact, in the lawsuit, the allegation is made that the Monster board breached its duties to have a racially balanced and gender balanced board, and in fact, also attacked the executive team's makeup. And Monster's charter for its nominating and corporate governance committee specifically stated that diversity of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity were important factors in evaluating suitable candidates for board membership. The only allegations in the lawsuit are not just relating to the board, but also to some very bad behavior that was called out regarding the board and the management team at Monster. These lawsuits, rest assured, are again, the lawsuit against Monster is not the only one. There are multiple lawsuits. So it's very important to be proactive, not reactive. It's important to keep these things in mind as boards move forward with board replenishment as guiding principles, not just to comply with statutory mandates, real or aspirational, but because it's the right thing to do for our communities. Board representation starts with proactive planning and intentionality of purpose. We can pass laws, we can file lawsuits, and both laws and lawsuits effectuate social change. But until we work together as a community in a proactive and affirmative way, change may be slow to occur. And with that said, I'm pleased to turn this over to my co-chair, Teresa Jakes, who will be leading a panel of truly impressive and elite individuals.
Thank you, Jen, for that, as always, incredible presentation. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today, who are three incredible directors. Firstly, Molly Campbell. And Molly serves as an infrastructure advisor on behalf of the US Department of Treasury. Molly is also the former director of the Port of New York and New Jersey, which is the third largest port in the US, as well as being the former COO, the former CFO and Deputy Executive Director at the Port of Los Angeles. Molly serves on the boards of East West Bank and Granite Construction. So welcome, Molly. We're so delighted to have you today. Hi. Secondly, Carolyn Flowers, and hopefully Carolyn's, we've got the Zoom Kremlins today, so hopefully Carolyn's box is going to appear shortly. But Carolyn is a managing principal and partner at InfraStrategies LLC. She has served as the CEO of the Charlotte Area Public Transit System and is the former Chief Operating Officer for the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Carolyn was a presidential appointee at the Federal Transit Agency, and she currently serves on the boards of Cubic Incorporation, as well as MV Transportation. So welcome, Carolyn. We look forward to seeing your picture shortly. And then finally, I am delighted to introduce somebody who in the biotech world in San Diego needs no introduction, as Dave Letterman would say, and that is Dr. Magda Marquette. So Dr. Magda is the co-founder and CEO of Alma Life Sciences, LLC, which is an early stage investment firm focused on innovative and emerging healthcare companies. So she has been a serial entrepreneur for most of her life, as co-founded and led and commercialized many life science companies. She was the co-founder of Alphia, which was successfully acquired by Ajinomoto. And during her career, Magda has received multiple prestigious awards, including being an Ernst & Young Regional Entrepreneur of the Year. So welcome to you all. I hope this reminds me of the old days of satellite where things went wrong because I can't actually see Magda and Carolyn, although Molly and I and Magda and Carol did meet this morning. So hopefully you're out there and can hear me in cyberspace. So Matt, if you're listening, my tech support help. So the good news is my first question actually is to Molly, and as Betsy indicated, today's theme is women directors in times of crisis. But I always start these events by having the panelists share their personal pathway to the board. And it's great to understand for those of you who are looking to get on boards, how those pathways can differ. So Molly, what was your pathway? Did somebody recommend you, and how did you know that person who recommended you?
Thank you so much, Teresa. And yes, someone actually did recommend me. And my pathway itself, I would say, started about 6 years ago. So I wouldn't say it was exactly a straight line. And it started with having lunch with a friend, colleague, mentor, quite frankly. And I did not know what we all know today, so much about the corporate world of boards. And I had lunch with that friend who, as I always kind of prepped for having lunch with her because she kept me honest, I would feel like I had to sit up straight and do things just right and kind of think through what my next adventure was going to be in terms of my professional life. And she said, you know, you ought to think about getting on a corporate board. And at the time I said to her, oh, there's just no way that I could add anything else to my life because I was on a lot of nonprofit boards, but did not really investigate the corporate board world. And I thought, you know, it was going to be more like the nonprofit world, which was, you know, giving of time, which is wonderful, giving of, you know, other things, which is terrific, but I hadn't really thought about corporate world. And I kind of put it out there as I learned a little bit more about the corporate world, board world, I should say. And, you know, months later, unbeknownst to just me kind of being proactive, I had an outreach from someone who was a board member for the organization I worked for. It was a commission. And he reached out to me and said, hey, you know, I'd love to have lunch with you because I want to run something by you. And at the time, I had no idea what it was going to be. And when we met for lunch, he said, you know, our board, our organization's been looking for a new board member, and we're looking for someone that had some financial and other experiences. And we've been very challenged. We've used a lot of the recruiters, but so far nothing. And he said, by happenstance, I mentioned mentioned that situation to my wife, and she said, what about Molly? And so that's kind of my first trek to getting on a corporate board. And that was a bank board, which I've been on for about 6 years now. And so my advice to everyone is kind of put it out, one, to the universe, and two, kind of do your investigation in terms of what opportunities may be there. And that was my first opportunity to sit on a board. And it's been great because it's in a highly regulated industry, similar to my background. And I've learned a lot about the banking world.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a great story. And it's shows the importance of networking, relationship building, and obviously your incredible reputation in your career. Great. So I understand that some people can see the panelists. So I'm going to keep going because I'm a trooper, as we say in England, keep calm and carry on. So Carolyn, how about your story? You are clearly a transportation expert. So what was your path to the board?
Well, like Molly, I also started out with some nonprofits, as well as being on some industry boards, being on the American Public Transportation Association's board, the Eno Foundation for Transportation's board, the Transportation Cooperative Research Program, and the Women and Transportation Seminar. But on the local level, I started out in LA on the political side, looking for an opportunity, to have some contribution to the community. But because I was working in public transportation, I could not get on a transportation board. So I started out with the City of LA's Quality and Productivity Commission, and one of their proposition for financial oversight, Prop Q. And when I went to Charlotte, I got on a philanthropic board as well as Leadership Charlotte's board after I completed their program. And then, having the public service background after I left the Federal Transit Administration, I started giving thought. At that time, I had gone into the private sector, what are the opportunities? And had some discussions with some friends, did some research and talked to a couple of recruiters who were actually recruiting CEO positions. And I said, no, thanks. I don't want to do another public transit CEO position, but I am interested in a board. So I was intentional about putting that out there. And a recruiter found me on LinkedIn for the MV Transportation Board. And I had an opportunity with Cubic through some networking opportunities for my name to be put into their search when they were looking for board expansion. So that is kind of like the road to my corporate boards.
Great. And I think it's interesting, LinkedIn, very, very important for recruiters and both in-house and external. As a board director recruiter, I always encourage people to, if you're looking for a board, make sure your bio is up to date and it's, all of the selling qualities that boards are looking for are included. So great. And I know that Cubic is so excited that they have you on the board, and it's a board that has 40% of women. So we're very proud.
We're
How many?
44%. We're
44%.
Yeah, 4 out of 9.
Excellent, excellent. So we're so proud of you, Cubic, here in San Diego. And then Magda, on the biotech as a CEO, and I know that you've also been a chairman of a board. How was your journey to a public board? Was it different than the transportation infrastructure group here, or was it similar?
I would say very different. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Teresa, for inviting me. I'm absolutely thrilled, and thank you for everyone who joined us. In San Diego, you always compete with a beautiful afternoon where you have many choices and you can go on a walk on the beach. So I'm so thrilled. And also, I want to really congratulate Becky and thank her for everything she's doing and for her audacious goals. Because, I've been thinking when I started my career in biotech, frankly, being a woman was a disadvantage, mainly for management. And now I think that being a woman is an advantage, and all of us have to realize that. It's an advantage, it's a clear advantage. And when I started my career, being on a board was not even on my goals. It was just way too far. But I started my first board because I was a company founder. And then as part of being the president of the company, I had a board seat. And frankly, it was a learning experience. I didn't know much about it, but I learned how important it is and how important boards are. And now sometimes tech people, biotech people in the early stages don't realize the importance of a board. So I definitely understood that. So first, my first experience being a founder, then once we were lucky to have our first exit, I was investing in some companies, and then I had some board seats as an investor. I went to very interesting nonprofits, such as Biocom, where I was chair of Biocom, and that gave me a lot of knowledge, I think, and visibility. And being chair of the UCSD Morse Cancer Center was also very, very good. So after all these various experiences, then I became an independent director for two public companies. The first one was a friend, a young, talented woman who I was mentoring or having friendly lunches with her. And one day I had about the same experience that Molly did, where she said, well, you should join our board. And then she introduced me to the team. I ended up joining the board, and it's been an incredible story because the company is now developing a vaccine for COVID. So it's been an incredible year where I learned a lot. And the other public company, which actually I'm not there anymore because it's been acquired in the last month, I went to that board through a recruiter. And the process was very different. It was very, very professional, I would say, very lots of interviews, lots of ways to see if I was the best fit. But bottom line, I think that we have to be open-minded and say that, you know, there are many opportunities to be on boards, and we have to be visible. We have to network, which is a bit challenging these days, but we can still have events like that. And more importantly, I think as women, we have to say it. We have to be open enough and say, I would like to be in a public board, and I think I can contribute A, B, and C, right? We have to say it. We cannot just wait for someone to really find us and ask us to join their board. And we are qualified. I bet that all of you listening today are overqualified. You certainly don't need to go in another training or get a certificate on it. I mean, it's great if you do, you always learn something, but be sure that you can contribute and make a difference.
Great, great. And your boards are Arcturus Therapeutics, and Phoenix is the one that has just been sold.
Phoenix was just acquired by Ligand, yes.
Right, great. And I think it's very interesting in biotech how many female CEOs there are. I mean, we have quite a few here in San Diego, which is fantastic, right? To see,
very
to see them
recent,
succeed.
by the way.
Yeah.
It's very recent because I think it was like 3-4 years ago, there was a study done that where there wasn't a single, I mean, there were two female CEOs in public companies. And now we have a lot of extremely talented women.
Great. Yeah,
Yeah,
we have
great.
Cara Kennedy on the director coach today. Lisa Walters Offit from
Yep.
Dare, she's a CFO, and
Right.
fantastic. Sheila Gandraji was on our panel last year. So we're excited at the progress here in San Diego. And I think it's going to, as Annalisa said, there are board seats to be got for women here. So let's get it together and make it happen.
Yep.
So what's fantastic for me is I can see you all. This is great. So Carolyn, let's just shift the discussion to what boards really value today in terms of the experience and, you know, the subject we're all dealing with, obviously for the pandemic, but having experience leading a crisis. There are people in the audience who probably have been pivotal to leading their companies through this crisis. And I'm going to have a shout out for CHROs and CIOs who I think have really come to the fore in this pandemic. But what sort of skills are boards really valuing today? And how does experience in crises make people more valuable?
Well, you know, first is the business acumen that you bring and the diversity of perspectives and experience. And, you know, I think once again that skill building and networking are, you know, key aspects that you can bring to the board, especially in these times of crisis and chaos. Um, I think one of the big things is that you have to have industry knowledge and you have to know the customer base, the products and services, being able to understand operations and the market. ESG is really important. As I said, diverse perspectives, being able to support diversity and inclusion with your work experience, having diverse socioeconomic backgrounds and diverse, demographic characteristics on the board. And being in leadership roles in your past career and experience is a key. Being able to demonstrate that you know how to run a business, you understand, and you've been involved. And with the pandemic, those are, I think, key attributes that women bring. And the boards are looking for right now. You have to be able to be responsive, and not just be there and reacting. You have to be proactive.
Right. Wow, that is quite a list. And gosh, I hope everybody was taking notes about those points because they were fantastic. And Magda, would you like to add anything to that list that Carolyn just shared with us?
I mean, Carolyn did such a good job there that I'm not going to add anything specific to that list, but I'm going to add some comments. And I have a friend who always says, never lose the opportunity of a good crisis. And I think that we are at a time of major transformation. I think it's beyond crisis. I think the models of the past don't fit quite well anymore. And now it's a time for a new model, because it's not just a health crisis, it's an economic crisis, a social crisis, climate crisis, and so on and so forth. And I see this as an amazing opportunity where I think, frankly, women can shine, because we are, we're used to handling crisis. We're used to thinking maybe more exponentially than men do. And I don't want to be, to put labels here, but it's a bit true that men can be more goal-oriented and linear, and we're kind of more open. So in this time, I think we have a role to play, and not just women. I mean, all together, right? We have a lot to do. We have to rebuild our companies, our societies, our families. It can be extremely challenging, but it can also be an opportunity to create something better. I mean, we're not going back, we're going forward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point about transformation. I mean, it's pretty mega what we're talking about here. And, from Molly talking about the pandemic, I think what's interesting, the National Association of Corporate Directors every year do a survey of their members, which is obviously mostly corporate directors. And they say, well, what do you think is going to be on the agenda the next year? And looking at last year's survey, no surprise, the pandemic was not mentioned, ESG was not mentioned. And it sort of plays to your point somewhat, Magda, that it's changing and boards need to change. But what's your view, Molly, on how the agenda of the board is being impacted by the pandemic?
I think one of the first things that we all have to pay attention to is being adaptive, because to your point, Teresa, you don't know what's going to come at you. You don't know, it wasn't on the radar screen last year in terms of what we're all dealing with. There's a ton of social disruption, economic disruption. The pandemic have certainly been the biggest influence that we've had. And so I think boards have to learn to be adaptive and be nimble. And then you start relying on some of the skill sets of your various board members. That the way I think about it is a little bit of muscle memory, because in some ways we've all gone through some other type of crisis as part of the discussion we had earlier, which is whether it's an economic crisis or the disruptions that we are all seeing with the technology. but for the technology ability that we have today, we all wouldn't be able to meet like this. So that's one of the things that I think boards have to get stronger in, whether it's digital, whether it's just the technology atmosphere. And we're also finding new ways to meet. We are not having to get on an airplane necessarily to get to where we're going. We're able to meet in a Zoom chat room or, WebEx, whatever the technology is. So there's such a reliance and I think need for us to make sure our CFO. So I appreciate your shout out to not the CFO, but the CTO, that they're doing the jobs that they need to do. And I think that the social change that's happening in terms of how we're doing things has evolved so rapidly that we also have to then focus on how is that affecting our customers and our consumers.
Right.
Because we're doing things very differently. Your grocery shows up at the, not that it didn't before, but grocery shows up at your front door. You are able to just go for, you have to go for walks differently in terms of your social group. You're interacting with your family members much differently. So I think all of those changes all lead to one thing. You have to be nimble, you have to be adaptive, and you have to see what's around the corner. And I think more and more boards are getting very good at doing that.
Right. And in terms of new skills and experiences, because when you look at boards, you find obviously the financial expert, you find typically a CEO, you find people who maybe bring specific industry knowledge. And we talked about, all the different associations that you three belong to that are valued by boards. But are there new skills for people out there in the audience that maybe they felt, typically people don't look for people with my skill set. Are there new skill sets that you anticipate boards adding down the line because of these, need to transform and pivot, if you will?
Yeah, I do. I think there is, there are a lot of people with legal background and legal knowledge that I think is value added to a board. The people skills, both soft and hard, and how you deal with that is, I think, also value added to a board. So it goes beyond, Teresa, just the financial, the CEO type skill sets. I think there are skills that, as you go down in an organization that you need to advance a lot more so to make the board more robust. And I would heavily emphasize, I think, the need to look beyond just the titles that people have, whether it's a CEO or CTO or CFO, and look at some of the actual jobs that they're doing. And you may have legal people that are in the legal realm that's doing a lot of things that have to do with D&I as an example, because the diversity and inclusion piece is a driver in terms of what we're dealing with today.
Right. It's interesting, the chief diversity officer, do you ever, I don't know how many boards actually, have recruited people into, again, I'm using a title, but somebody who has corporate accountability for that. Have you seen boards adding that skill set to them?
I haven't seen it directly with the boards that I am currently on, but I do think that they are much more focused on, I apologize, I have a dog that's ill, that's moving about much more.
No problem.
So it's the life that we're all living of doing things at home. But I haven't seen that directly in terms of at the board level, but certainly in the organization, that's becoming much more pronounced and very important.
Yeah, very important. Okay, thank you. Great insights. And Carolyn, anything you'd like to add to Molly's perspective there?
It's a time of managing in chaos, and there's so many unknowns, but there's a need for quick response. And so, being able to be nimble and adaptive, as Molly said, I think is key at this time. And, there's a heightened sense of risk. And, the strategic outlooks have been affected. And so, looking at skills and experience that people have in strategic planning, and and tactical planning, because you need both right now. And I think there's more focus on ESG with the social and political disruptions. And so, I think I reiterate what Molly has said about having skills on the board that have backgrounds in social and human capital, I think are extremely important. And with the increased focus on welfare and the wellness of employees, safety and health, I think are paramount now. And that same focus is on the marketplace. So, you could also have people on the board that have safety backgrounds and, occupational health backgrounds. And then the bottom line is, having the leadership background where you have people who have experience in being leaders and being decision makers. So I think those are important attributes to look at as we move forward in kind of like the evolution of boards.
Right. Great insights. Thank you, Carolyn. So Magda, you touched on this. So I'd like to sort of go back a little bit, if I may. So the national discussion, 28 virtual conversations like this across the US. So our national theme is Women Directors During Times of Crises. And you shared, Magda, your experience from the biotech world, but what types of experience do you think that women can specifically bring to boards in these times of crisis?
Well, I think women can bring their experience anytime, not just times
Good
of
point.
crisis.
Good point.
My own experience with bringing women on board is that on the boards where I was chairing, is like it was almost like an immediate effect. As soon as I brought like not just one but two, so you need to have some kind of critical mass. Then the level of discussion goes, it becomes different, and it's just a different conversation. So it's really good in any case. In times of crisis, I think that there is also an element of board culture and then communication or nurturing, if you wish. I mean, we talked right before about the skills that women bring to the board. It's all about leadership, right? Strategic thinking, specific skills. But in addition to that, a board is also, it's like a management team. It's a team, a board has to be functional. And I've seen some boards where you have extremely qualified people, but they're not functional. So you have to find a way for everyone to bring more than their specific expertise. So you have to build trust. You have to build open communication. You have to be very creative and just think outside of the box and what if, right? Because we are in a time of change, like we all said. So it's a time to be very creative. And to be creative, you have to be in a safe environment and you have to be in a team where you trust each other and you can really share your ideas. So I think that's really an element that goes beyond the specific characteristics that you need to be very good in finance or very good in certain aspects that are required for a board, but it's the team aspect that I think is very, very important.
Yeah.
Beyond like meeting every quarter, it's all the everything that goes beyond that, and how can you be really functional?
Right. Okay, that's great insight. So Molly, from your perspective, and you're getting a shout out, by the way, from Betsy for being in her book, The Board Game. A shameless plug for Betsy's book.
It's a great book.
So what is your perspective about what types of experience that women bring that's going to be particularly helpful, valuable in these current times?
You know, I think as women, we are so good at juggling so many things that's one of those skill sets and that I think is very helpful. In addition, decision making, one of the things that we didn't talk about in terms of types of crisis, but just in general, you know, how important it is to get the information you need, analyze it and make a decision and move on. And I think, and if it's not the right decision, to be able to make a different decision and provide that kind of guidance. So I think the part of being both a coach, because you have to remember, as I think about boards, you know, our responsibilities to the shareholders, and we have to make sure that we're mindful in terms of the decisions that we make that are responsive to the shareholders. And as we think about all of that, it's that balancing of being able to help provide guidance, information, especially to, you know, the CEO. And I've got to say something that Magda touched on that I totally agree with, and that is how boards work as a group and as a team. And to your point, Teresa, is what do women bring? And I think working with that team and bringing that dynamic into play is really crucial as well, because every once in a while you need to kind of raise your hand and say, you know what, I'm not in the same place that everyone else is on that, and bringing that a different perspective, or an added perspective, I shouldn't say different, so that the boards could be holistic in terms of the views that they generally take. I think those skills that a lot of women generally bring as part of our day-to-day, and that's broad generalization, part of our day-to-day lives, I think is something that's very helpful in the boardroom. And
Yeah.
you know, I tend to be, I don't want to make it a we, tend to ask questions. That's how I learn.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this. Give me more background. And I think a lot of women tend to, broad generalization, kind of do that as well. That's how we somewhat learn and think through information. And that's a very helpful skill set, to just be able to say, hey, can I ask a question regarding that? Add to the dynamics in the
absolutely. And talking of juggling, I don't know if that was your doggy you need to take care of, but feel free. But that's great. And I think, you know, when we look at sort of the next area I'd like to talk about, which is ESG, and Jen gave us an overview, and this is a big issue now, environmental, social, and governance. So if you are looking, you know, in the audience, a little tip, if you're looking to get on a board, this is an area that it's worth reading up about. There's lots of online information. Mints actually, here's a shameless advert for Mints, but Mints actually do, I signed up for a video webinar on, you know, ESG, so it's well worth doing it. But it will have, it is an important topic in the boardroom, and I'm pretty sure that it will have an impact on skills that are required as well. And potentially, I don't know, Carolyn, whether you're seeing at CUBIC, whether there's a specific subcommittee addressing this, or whether you're bringing in specific skills to address the subject of ESG and all around the governance issues.
At CUBIC, ESG is under our nominating and governance committee. And, you know, this committee encompasses corporate responsibility. You know, ESG is an issue, and we look at it as a program and track the progress. And review what is going on. We just had our board meeting yesterday, and we had an ESG update at that meeting. This committee looks at the social and human capital issues. They look at diversity and inclusion in the workplace, both from gender perspective and ethnicity. And then, you know, after the issues arose with the George Floyd killing, we saw across the corporate spectrum that corporations were making statements about their commitment to diversity, civil rights, and human rights. But I think, as board members, we have to make sure that those are just not statements, that they're actionable.
Mhm.
And at Cubic, we were accountable to make sure that those statements reflected real actions, not just lip service. The leadership team supported the commitment through employee involvement, unconscious bias training, community involvement, philanthropic support for organizations that advance diversity and rights. So, you have to ensure that you go that one step beyond and make sure that board members are holding the organization accountable for what they say they're going to do and make sure that it's actionable.
Right, that's great. That's fantastic insights. And Molly, are you on ESG? Are you dealing with it in a similar way on your boards? Is there a committee?
Yeah, similar. I am on 2 committees, audit and comp committee for Granite Construction, which is the second board seat that I occupy. And then on the bank board, I'm also on the governance committee in addition to audit and compensation. And so those are areas that we do look at. Earlier in the conversation, you had asked me about D&I, and my interpretation of your question was more of, are we bringing someone on directly at a board level? But in addition to that response, I also want to say just in general that both boards that I sit on are very diverse, having both women and minorities, underrepresented groups covered. We have 3 women on one board and then another 3 on the second board. So I'm enormously proud of just the fact that we're representing our consumer and customer base. But similar to what Carolyn said, that we are getting updates, and we actually did hire someone that is the chief diversity officer on one of the boards. And it's been wonderful to get the updates in terms of how we're strategically focused, how we're thinking about it. And it's just becoming part of our DNA.
Right.
The diversity and inclusion.
That's great. And Magda, in your space, very regulated, how is ESG sort of infiltrated, your boards? Are you similarly dealing with it in terms of committee and updates?
Yeah, I would say something close to what Carolyn and Molly said. It's part of, I think, both committees, the nomination and governance, and the compensation, because compensation goes beyond the compensation by itself. It's really the human resources in general. It handles diversity and workforce. So this is how we are handling it. And I believe that it's not just some words that every company said end of May, but it's really something real, and we pay more and more attention to it, and we make sure that it's really part of the company.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the shareholders and the extension of stakeholders, where you've got employees, customers, society, etc.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
It's really, from a board director, the remit is continually extending, more governance, more sort of scrutiny, if you like, over how boards are performing. So it is not necessarily, if someone in the audience or people in the audience aren't necessarily familiar with the role of a board director, it's not just about showing up for meetings. There's actually quite a lot involved. Just mention some of the committees there: compensation, nomination and governance, and audit, typically are 3, and then special standing committees maybe for strategic planning, etc. Okay, so now it's great that in addition to having fantastic careers, serving on boards, corporate boards, but I think each one of you have been very visible in your industry by membership of trade associations, and political appointments, and we how valuable is that? I mean, often we find women serving on not-for-profit boards, and they generally ask the question of, you know, how can you transition from a not-for-profit? Is it possible to transition from not-for-profit into corporate? So how can you leverage, you know, your board experience, which today is not necessarily in the corporate boardroom? Who wants to kick off? Maybe Molly, shall I ask you to kick off with that one?
Sure. I've actually sat and still, you know, on a couple of commissions. I was on the planning commission for my local city. I was on a lot of trade organizations for the American Association of Port Authorities, International Association of Ports and Harbor, and I think, and other trade organizations, as well as some nonprofit. All of those have been really extremely valuable to me. I look back at the experience and what I have, people I've met as part of that. And I think it's a great insight in terms of the world that I operated in before, which is primarily ports and seaports, as well as transportation. And, you know, either leading or being on a subcommittee of any of those groups have been very helpful, because as I think about, okay, could I lead a particular committee? Some of the skill sets that I've learned from those organizations have been enormously helpful. And so I wouldn't trade that. In fact, I continue to look at some of those organizations to see how I could continue to keep my toes kind of dipped in it, because it just kind of, again, increases my knowledge and also expands the group that I'm in, the people that I'm involved with. I will add one more thing. Last year, I was fortunate enough to do a fellowship at Harvard, and I met 70 new people. And you don't think about some of those as possible board opportunities, but they do become that. We started off this whole conversation about saying that we want to put that out there and being affirmative in terms of your desire to be on another corporate board. And I remember saying to someone when they asked me, what do you want to do next? And I said, you know, I'm enjoying the board role, and I, you know, want to consider other board opportunities should they come about. And I actually got an outreach from someone that was part of the 70 people that I met, that was part of that organization as well. I apologize for my dog. She's just today. So, but I'm saying that, Teresa, because I think that a lot of different organizations, whether it's trade or otherwise, it's an opportunity to network with a lot of people. And it just builds your strength and across a lot of different dynamics.
Thank you, Molly. So we're coming up to close to end. So I think I'd like to just give you each the opportunity just to soundbite, if you will, your advice to the audience here as they're either thinking about starting, or midway through their strategy, developing a strategy to get on the board. So Carolyn, what advice would you give?
Well, I think it's taking advantage of opportunities. You know, the skill building and networking, just building on what Molly was just saying, you know, being part of organizations that support and promote women and advocate for women. We have to basically focus on the talent and retention and support for women, and, you know, giving opportunities or providing opportunities, you know, through mentorship and sponsorship. And that's what we can do in roles as board members. And, you know, just look at ways that we can increase the focus on ESG in our roles as board members. But, you know, I think it's give and take. We've had an opportunity to, you know, get to where we are. And so we need to ensure that other women have that pathway also.
Right. Thank you. Great advice. And Magda, your words of wisdom as we end.
My words. I usually ask when friends, coworkers ask me, you know, their advice about being on boards. I say, you know, you need to ask yourself two questions. What do I want, and how can I help? What do I want? Because there's so many different boards, right? So what kind of board do you want? And then honestly, how can you help? What is your unique value proposition? What do you bring? to the board, because a board seat is a relatively unique seat. Not companies may have 10,000 employees, but they're going to have a limited number of board
Right.
seats.
Right.
So what is it that you bring to the picture? Is there something that you've done and then maybe someone else hasn't done it?
Right.
We all have a very unique proposition, and I think we have to be very clear about that. And that's not an easy thing to do. It wasn't easy for me
Right.
to really identify, what
Your superpower.
like we said before, be visible, say that you want to be on a board, network, and identify women leaders who you relate to, and connect with them.
Right. Thank you. And Molly, the final word I'm going to give to you, and possibly your puppy in the background.
Hopefully not. Hopefully she'll be a happy camper. But I think Carolyn and Magda covered most of it very well. The only thing I would also add to that is kind of have fun at what you're doing, what your core occupation is, what your, because some of that flows and comes across to the person you're sitting next to that you just don't even think about, and be good at what you're doing in terms of enjoying it. So that I would say be visible to the extent that you can. If there are organizations that you could join that are not-for-profit trade organizations, and take a leadership role when you're joining those organizations, and take a leadership role that may be a little bit more challenging than what you would normally do, because then, I think that's where we all learn and stretch and grow, and then be intentional.
Great.
So that
Thank you.
would be my advice.
Thank you. Well, we could talk for longer, but and maybe we'll reconvene next year. But I would love to thank each and every one of you for, it's been a wonderful discussion. You shared some incredible insights, and on behalf of the San Diego Leadership Committee, we truly thank you for your time and insights. We can't thank you enough. So thank you, Magda, Carolyn, and Molly. And we are now all going to be going into the breakout sessions. You should each have your links, and please log on to your links or click your link to the breakout session where your director coaches will be working with you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being your moderator today.